Hey everybody, welcome to the Slick Tree Podcast. I'm your host, Colby Langford. The point of this show is to help improve ourselves as dogmen and to raise the quality of the dogs on the end of our lead. So let's settle in, turn the volume up, and let's see if we can't learn a trick or two together from our guests. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm your host, Colby Langford. Today we're going to be hearing from Fiest man Chris Ross. So, how you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing good, bud. How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Just trying to keep my chickens all in a row and in the coop, I guess.
I understand that, man. I appreciate you having me on, man.
Oh, well, I'm glad that you took the time to do this. And just to fill everybody else in, we met through Facebook about 2 years ago, I think. We've actually met a few times in person through hunts and dealings in a custom rod. But anyways, let's just jump right into it. And Chris, so what can you tell us about the dogs you're hunting and what's it like where you hunt at?
Yeah, so I over here in western Oklahoma, the land of the last few quail in Oklahoma, not really a lot of squirrels, So I'll just throw that out. Most people, they find it pretty crazy that I got squirrel dogs in western Oklahoma. So,
Yeah.
It's just a crazy deal. Just 8 years ago, I've always squirrel hunted my whole life. Just something we did, between seasons or something, between turkey season and deer season, with my dad and uncles. I had a buddy, did pig dogs, and he was like, man, he goes, I've got these timber curs over. They wanted tree squirrels, and I wouldn't take a dog. I wasn't ready, going in and out of college and stuff and working. And I was like, man, I ain't ready for it. And then long story short, we found some on Facebook. Finally got on the little hunting page. Didn't even know there was a squirrel hunting page, just looked it up on Facebook. Ben Trevino, he had a dog named LT Lamont that he did a little bit of winning with. He had his daughter had a little red and white Fiest. And well, one day he's at school, doing his ag teaching stuff, and comes home and they was hooked up, and he had this litter of pups. So my two little cousins at the time, a little cousin and his buddy, they were in college, and I talked them into getting a dog. I was like, man, let's bring 3 of those pups back over here to western Oklahoma. And I said, I sure like that brindle one. And so I reached out to Ben, messaged him on Facebook, and he was like, yeah, we'll meet in Henrietta. That was kind of halfway point. And he's down there, and I think it's called Eagletown, down there in the southeast part, down there by Broken Bow.
Mm-hmm.
So we met up, and I came back without a clue in the world how to train a squirrel dog. I lived at Canton at the time, and the North Canadian River comes out of there, and I lived on the north side of town, and I didn't know if I was going to make a dog out of that first one or if I was going to ruin her. I don't know the deal because I messaged so many people on what to do. She learned every tactic there was to train a pup, So bought her back and, got her as an 8-week pup and did some drags and stuff like that. And then talked to another old man by the name of Vic Fowler that told me, he said, if you can let that pup run loose, he goes, let her run loose. And I'm being on the north side of town, and the population of Canton's like 600 people, so I wasn't worried about it. I was right next to the river. So I let her go, and at about 3.5 months, 4 months, that dog just started doing it on its own, and the first 3 months before she would leave the yard, I put more squirrels in front of her face than what I probably should have, but being green, not growing up around squirrel dogs, I didn't know any better,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of how I got started in it, and that little dog, I'd tie a squirrel behind my kid, and at the time my oldest one, and I let him run around the yard. He was pretty fast and he could stay away from her, and she'd be after him.
That's a training tactic I haven't heard before.
Hey, but she would chase, that. And with the Fiest, the little legs, getting started, they're quick dogs, but he was fast enough that he could stay with the rope on him. He could stay away from her. I that's probably not a story I should be telling, but that's what I did,
right.
and that's probably why he plays college ball now, because I made him fast, had a dog after him.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's just something I did, man. I mean, I was really clueless getting into it. And like I said, she got out there and she started treeing. And me and my wife at the time, we worked different shifts. And she didn't grow up around hunting, so I wish she knew a little bit more, because she would hear a tree and, just didn't know to go to her, and
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't have the common sense to tell her to go to her, so she would just be out there treeing all day long, and nobody going to her. So finally I got her, and she went about 100 yards one day when I was mowing, and she got treed, and she did it nice, and I finally got to see it happen, and she was probably, I got her in August or so, and this was probably, sometime in April or whatever, and I pinned her up, and I just kept her put up till May 15th when squirrel season opened up. And I went out, and on that first time out, I knocked 3 down to her, and I was just tickled to death, and didn't know any better. Started posting videos, on the page. I'm happy I got a squirrel dog,
Mm-hmm.
and just I didn't do a lot of tying at the time to tie her up, or anything like that. So she was kind of a loose dog on the tree.
Mm-hmm.
There was some times where she'd be belly up, but a lot of times she'd be a little loose, and I could tell what tree the squirrel was in, and I could still go knock them out. That was just kind of my start in it, with the dogs. And I still got her now. She just turned 8 in August last month. Out of shape, she'll still go put up the meat, and sometimes she's belly up, sometimes she's loose on the tree. That's just the way she is, and I didn't know how to break her,
Yeah.
so uh, but that's my start, man. So
For the people that haven't been there, what's the timber and whatnot like where you're hunting? Are you hunting tree rows or hedge or big timber or what's it like?
it's kind of hit and miss. Some of my places, it'd be creek bottoms that go through, and our creek bottoms out here could kind of be like, compared to eastern Oklahoma or somewhere else, can be like a fence row. It could be like a fence row there. It'd be cold squirrels, but that could be our creek bottoms. In some places I'm kind of borderline between the Oklahoma City. I'm about an hour west, and the Panhandle, I'm about 2.5, 3 hours from the Panhandle. So I'm kind of that breaking point of the good timber.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I can have some thick places where I'm in them, pretty good. It'll be I can get on a couple quarters of land or a half a section of land, and it's it don't look any different than over there, just a little bit shorter timber
Mm-hmm.
than eastern Oklahoma or Arkansas or something like that. But most of my places are a lot of creek bottoms, and then, like I said, all the lake public hunting up there. I do a lot of hunting there, and it's got really good timber. So I spend most of my time there hunting. If it's not muzzleloader season or rifle season, you can bet I'm up there either during the kill season or the couple months that there's not a kill season. I've got a dog in there, and I'm training or doing something up there. So spend a lot of time there, and it's I can't remember the actual total acreage that I have up there, but I mean it's pretty much me. It's in western Oklahoma. I try to get buddies in it. There's a few coon hunters around, but just nothing like you would in eastern Oklahoma or somewhere else.
Yeah, and
So.
you guys don't hardly have a gray squirrel to be found over there, do you?
There is not, there's not a gray squirrel at all to be found. I told my cousin, he's a game warden down in southeastern or South Oklahoma, down around Ardmore, and I told him, I said, man, import me some of those gray squirrels. I said, there's times I go over there and my dogs will look like a fool with them gray squirrels because they're used to these big old fox squirrels barking back. I wish there was a way I could, but yeah, it's just primarily fox squirrels or it is fox squirrels over here, and those suckers will be as big as my Fiest.
Yeah, I'd tell you what, I'd
So,
trade you out right now because I'm messing with a whole bunch of pups at the house, and we don't have anything but gray squirrels. There's some reds if you go a little ways away. It's tough this time of year because by the time a dog gets under the tree they're under, they go straight up the tree and they start timbering, and it might be 100 yards before they get to their hole, but they never stop moving. They're getting to that hole. I mean, if a dog sits there and a pup wants to sniff around a tree and check the tree for 20, 30 seconds, that squirrel's already 4 trees over and it's gone.
right,
Yeah,
right,
it makes
right.
it rough.
And I've learned that, and that's some of the stuff that I've actually learned, going, because I travel quite a bit, just to get into gray squirrels and hunt something different, getting bigger timber and just to see what it's about. The first gray squirrel I treed, I think, was 3 years ago in a comp hunt. First one I ever went to, go in there, and my dog Jet that I had, he went in, and I mean, we just cut him, and he goes in within about I don't know, 55 seconds. And he trees, and we get to shaking. And then and the bad part is, didn't even get to see it. First one of my dogs that ever treed, I didn't get to see it. And everybody else was just being honest. And that sucker went straight up the tree. And I'm trying to back out, and see it, and didn't even get to see it. So it was a crazy deal, but hey, I got to notch that off. Hey, I finally treated one of these wild squirrels. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it is. I tell a lot of people. I've had people, that have came out. Buddy of ours, I should say, Lane. He's came over and brought a dog over and hunted over at Canton last year. His dog Rex, and got to see how it's just a different environment. You can get into some short timber, and you can get into some pretty good timber. Not the huge timber or nothing, but you get into some pretty good timber, and it's just a different world over here where you treat those fox squirrels. They hold tight. The leaves come off. They'll start timbering. Late December,
Mm-hmm.
January, they kind of start timbering then. September, October, November, most part, man, you walk over with a 22 and you just knock them in the head and go put them on another one.
Mm-hmm.
It's pup training friendly over here.
You mentioned your jet dog, which I know about him, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your jet dog and what else you got at the house right now besides the brindle dog and jet that you told us about earlier?
Okay. So, Jed, I got him 2 years after Julie, uh, or sorry, 3 years after Julie. He's a little Feist dog, little yellow Feist male that I got him from over at Indianola, around that area, and just seen him on Facebook with last one in the litter, and I was ready for another one. Julie was pretty much a finished dog, and I was wanting to start another one and see if I learned anything and do something a little different. So I went and picked him up and came back over here to Western Oklahoma, and he was a 9-week old puppy when I got him. So I had talked to a few guys, and some guys that gave me advice again. I didn't want to do the same things I did with Julie after posting videos. I ask a lot of questions. One thing I do is ask questions if there's something that I definitely don't know. So I asked quite a few questions about, like, should I run them together? And some guys are like, well, run them together, and once they break off, then you break him out and you single him out. So I did a little bit of that. Didn't do any live squirrel stuff. I didn't even let him play with a squirrel. The way I did it was I took one that I knocked out with Julie, and I think he was a month old, or not a month old, but he was 3.5 months old. And I took one of those fresh squirrels that I killed. I just went out here south of town a few miles, got a place close, and I mean, just fresh as could be. Sucker wasn't even stiff. Rigor mortis hadn't set in on it. I'm talking fresh. And I came and I drug him out here, and I brought him out the kennel and set up a 60-yard drag, and he had never been on anything. And I took him out there, and he goes over there and he starts treeing on it. And then I just, I quit. Then I started packing him to the woods, and I would pack him and I would pack him. I've got a little place north of town that's just a couple miles away, and it's where the kids run cross country at. It's loaded up with squirrels, and it was just walking and walking and walking. I wanted him to wasn't going to do the same mistake, and when he treed, I was going to try to catch him, and I was going to tie him, to make sure. And then finally he broke out, went in there one day, and he goes and he falls treed. And well, I get in there, and he had two coons up the tree. I said, now, Jet, we didn't work on that, but I'll take it, because he treed, wasn't nothing to knock there.
Yeah.
And I was just tickled as could be. He was now, I don't know, around 4 months or so, somewhere in there, and he had treed a double on some coons, in that place. And so I kept hunting him, and then finally, I just wasn't seeing the progress I thought with the squirrel. So I started running him and Julie together. Got up there, he would back her, and then one day up there on public ground, it's probably around, I don't know, 7.5, 8 months old, somewhere in there, because I had ran him a little bit during the summer on the cool mornings. It was just one of those good years where it was wet and wasn't that typical Western Oklahoma 120-degree burn you up,
Mm-hmm.
So I ran him quite a bit when he was a pup there through the summer. We were staying in the 90s, and kind of kept cool temps. So come the fall, I had him up there at Canton, and Julie goes in there and he trees, and I mean, I just cut him loose, and he goes and shoot trees, and he goes by her, and he blows by her, and he goes another. And this is before I even had tracking collars. I'm gonna say 80 to 100 yards, and I see Julie squirrel, and when I walked in, and he just blew, because he'd always go with her. He wouldn't sit around my feet. He'd always go with her, and he blew by her, and he goes in there, and he goes and falls tree. Well, I get in there, and he's got the squirrel, and he's on. I mean, right on the tree, right there. He's got the squirrel. So I walked past Julie. She stayed put, knocked his down, praised him, sent him on, and I thought he's gonna go back to Julie, and he took off again. And he goes in there again. I get back to Julie, and I go in there, and I knock Julie down. I sent her on, and they stayed apart for that day. For about a good, I don't know, hour or so, they stayed apart, and I was like, I might have done something right, for the most part, because I hadn't run them together very much, and he started staying apart, and so I just put Julie up at that point. The rest of December and January, I just made a dog out of him. He still had some puppy in him and stuff like that, but I just ended up making a dog out of him, and just enjoyed the heck out of him. He'd babble a little bit on the ground, because he still had a little puppy in him, but when he would fall treed, and he would just be there, and he wouldn't leave it. Most of the time he would stay there, and he wouldn't leave that tree. So it was probably I don't know, about 2.5 years after that or so, it might be 3. I don't know. It might have been 3 years. And then I kind of started jetting, reaching out to Lane, and started talking about kind of the comp stuff, because I thought I had something special.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time, I guess I should say, but in that time, before I kind of got to the comp stuff, I picked up another dog from Kane Riggs. Her name's Pretty. These kids come up with some of those names, and they little bitty Fiest. She was the run of the litter, and I had always heard about these champ dogs, and I had been researching, and I wanted one of these champ bred dogs. Went and picked her up, drove 3 hours to Poto to pick her up from Kane Riggs over there, and Jim Allen's Sugarfoot dog, and Kane's Carmela. And I went ahead and picked that pup up, and I didn't know if I was ever going to get her out the house, because them kids just was loving on her so much, And I was like, well, she ain't going to be worth the darn. But anyways, I started hunting her, and so I tried a different tactic this time. I had never done the live squirrel, and I said, this is the third dog, so I'm going to see what comes up here and give it a try. And so I trapped a squirrel, and because this little dog, I mean, a tail, man, you put a tail in front of her. I played with her with the tail quite a bit when she was young. She would win that tail, and she would just open up on it, and I mean, that little dog could spit them out, so I was pretty impressed by it. And so I was like, man, I just got to see, and she was, I don't know, about probably around that 3-month range, and I went ahead and trapped one. Keep in mind, Kobe, but at 3 months, she's probably about 9 pounds.
So she
she's
probably wasn't much bigger
wet.
than one of them fox squirrels.
She's not a big dog at all. And so I bring that trap boy, and she laid on her belly, and she just gave that squirrel the business, and I had to pull the squirrel away, from her. And I was like, well, I ain't going to do that no more. I said, and then I got to talking to people again, and they're like, no, she's going to expect too much, but just pull her off. You need to just start hunting that little dog. I showed that video. I'm proud of her. And she just, she just wop, 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 wop. I mean, that little dog can just throw it out there. As Kobe, as you say, my little Chihuahua could just throw it out there,
Mm-hmm.
So, but she could, and so I kind of did away with the live squirrel, and I just started hunting her, and she would go and she'd back jet, she'd go and back Julie, and then finally, I knocked a couple down, and then I started hunting her by herself, and then she started treeing more and more by herself, and she really liked having her squirrel, and usually did have her squirrels. So I'd break her out and just kind of broke that dog out, and that's kind of how it went with that other female, and those are the 3 I've had, just kind of between kids and didn't want to overload myself on dogs and kids getting attached, I didn't want to keep swapping or buying new or get too many out here. So that's the three older dogs that I've had. So I've enjoyed them quite a bit. But yeah, that little pretty, she done a heck of a job for me. So really enjoyed that little dog. So got a lot of compliments on that little dog going and treating a squirrel. And I tell you old cur guys, how much dog do you need to treat a squirrel? I said, if I do make a bad shot, I want to see a fair fight when it hits the ground. That cur dog's just going to crunch him.
Yeah.
So.
So what was it that, other than you just thought you had something in the jet dog, is that just what made you want to start going to some comp hunts? Just to kind of put him on a measuring stick, or?
Yeah, that was my measuring stick. When I seen that he wanted to be a part, and not really back Julie and wanted to go be his own dog, I was like, from what I mean, I can't tell you how many hours I sit in here and on the TV, and pull up that on that Roku or whatever you call that thing and pull up YouTube and just watch the UKC hunts, watch NSD. And I'm like, I got to do that. I think he could do it. I really want to do it. I reached out to Lane, and he was wanting to start a chapter over here at Okema. He was going to do UKC hunts. I said, Lane, I know I'm 2.5 hours away. I've reached out to guys. I think we can get Feist dogs here. I said, let's host hunts. He was like, all right. He goes, I know I can get cur dogs here, and I was like, yeah, I know you can. I said, but I've talked to a few Feist guys. I said, we just never had the opportunity, and they said they never had the opportunity to have them here, unless they hunted NSD, and so Lane fired it up, and that first year, and me and Reggie and Stanton, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He came, he had that little dog Spook, another champ bred dog, and then old Joseph Cooper had that Batman dog, his little black dog, and we went out, got 3 dogs on the first one, and went out, and I got minus, and
What'd you get minus for?
I got minus on. He got in there, so he treated a squirrel, and then got in there deep. I don't know, 400 or something like that, and then when you start bragging, you're feeling good with 25 minutes left. They always make a fool. I call him treat, and we get in there, and old dog just he left the tree to chase a gray squirrel. It went to timbering, and he went to following it. So I was happy that he followed it because I'm a meat hunter originally, but at the same time I wanted to win. So it was a tough tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was kind of how the first one went. And Kerr guys came in, and I think old Dane came in, and he had some plus points on the Kerr side, and he won, with one of his Kerr dogs, and I said, well, heck, and so we had an evening round because we were just starting off. We had a morning round and an evening round, and we went out that evening, and it was in September, and I mean, it was still steaming hot, and we went out that evening, and heck, we didn't have in shape dogs, and they went out and they hunted for about half of the hunt, and the rest of the half, hate to admit it, they looked like crap. So it was just a bust on that evening round too. So from there, I was like, man, I can get into this. So we went and we had another hunt. I think it was in October sometime. And we went home and we started working, pretty good, or what I thought I was working pretty good. And I believe Joseph Cooper came and Mark Brown came. He had a diesel pup, a nice female. I mean, a nice female dog that he had. He bought her, and then Reggie came again with his dog Spook. We went out hunting and got beat by one squirrel to Mark, his little diesel female. And I mean, she's a nice dog. She's going to have her toenails on the tree, and I was like, now I see some of the stuff I'm supposed to be doing. I said, I'm learning now, from an old school man, and he showed me what it's supposed to look like with his little female. And I'm telling you, she would get on that tree and she wasn't going to leave it, and I was like, okay, I thought I had what I needed. I said, I still got to go back to the chalkboard and start working on this dog a little more, so he won that, and he got that plaque. And I hate to admit it, I'm competitive, but I played a lot of ball and stuff like that, and I started getting competitive a little bit with these dogs. I said I want to learn, but at the same time, I'm driving over here, and I'm telling my wife every time I'm gonna move something on the wall, one of these kids' pictures or one of those 38 crosses in there. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say I'm taking down the cross. That ain't what I meant. I just said I needed a space,
Yeah.
so don't take it the wrong way. I tell people that all the time when I tell that joke. I told my wife, I said, one of those got to come down. I said, you're either gonna take a kid's picture down or you're gonna take a cross down, but I'm gonna put a plaque on there. And she would giggle. She's like, I'll wait till the day comes, and I was like, all right, so and old Lane and Dane, they had some pretty slick plaques that they had made, and I said, man, I done had basketball, baseball, everything else. I said, I need something like that, something different. We go, and I think it was January is when we ended up having another hunt, and it was the state hunt. We went out, and Lane went out with us. We had the Fiest hunt on a different date than the Kerr hunt, the state hunt. So we had them on different weekends. So Lane was going to guide us, and it was myself, Reggie, and Mark. We went out, and it was cold. It was windy. If you ever been in Western Oklahoma, you know all about the wind. It's always blowing. You guys get a little bit of wind over there on the east side, but I've always got it.
Hmm.
And so I'm liking my odds, going into this state hunt. We get out there, and it rained the night before. I mean, it was cold. It was one of them days. It was miserable, and go out, and same thing, Lane's sitting there, and he's like, man, I'm gonna go put my chaps on. And we already had our chaps. The guys were hunting. Lane was just being the guide and judge in there, and he goes back to get his chaps, and we cut him loose, and Jet goes in there, and he falls treed just like that. I call him treed, and he goes in and trees a squirrel. And that's the one that won it. And so I ended up winning the state hunt that day. So I got my plaque, made the Full Cry magazine. I'm just tickled as could be. I was like, hey, I accomplished one of my goals, and not, and just added that it just happened to be the state hunt that we had. So it was a pretty neat deal. Still there. Go on to the next year, and we just fell off. Just couldn't get enough Feist guys there. It just kind of fell through. So I'm like, I run these Feist, and I've been working at it, and I'm gonna end up trying to do the NSD. I'm gonna give my little dog a shot in the NSD. So did a couple of those hunts, and that's interesting. I've drawn a hound or a cur dog. Every time. There's only been a couple fights that have shown up, so I've always had those bigger dogs. And it's been pretty fun. Jet'll he really don't like a bigger dog, so he does really well, and he'll stay apart and go do his thing. I've had my ups and downs. He'll the hard part is him timbering. That's his hard part. He wants to cause timber a squirrel. And we've worked on it a lot. Still working on it. He still has his flaws a little bit with it, but we still go play.
Hmm.
But no, we've had some good stuff at the state hunt last year, the NSD state hunt up there at OK. I drew Ricky Merrill's dog, and OD Patton drew him. He had Slim. I believe it was Slim over there, and
Hmm.
we went out there on the state hunt, and Jet looked like he had never wanted to tree a squirrel in his life. I actually withdrew him for the hunt. There was snow on the ground. I left Western Oklahoma, and it was warm that morning. I left at 3 o'clock that morning to get over there, and it wasn't. I shouldn't say warm. It was 10 degrees warmer than it was over there, and he acted like he didn't want to hunt. And he just made me look like a fool for driving 3 hours. But I got to see some good dog work and learn some more there. Back in January, at that hunt. Just one of those deals, man. He just, he went out and he would hunt some, and then he'd come back and kind of look like a fool. I'm looking at them guys, and even Ricky, he goes, I see your videos. He's like, this little dog hunts. He said, he hunted in them other hunts. I said, but I don't know what it is. I said, them dogs are known to make you look like a liar. I said, well, mine definitely doing it today,
Hmm.
So I went back to the chalkboard again, and went to putting in work, just started going again, and then went to the some more NSDs and looked pretty good. And then just here a couple weeks ago, I drew D again, but he had Spike this time. I believe it was Spike. I might have him backwards which way he had him. I don't know. He might have had Spike or Slim. I don't know. But he had one, and I drew him, and then I drew old Mr. Harlow from Mississippi. So it's a hound, a cur, and my little 22 pound Fiest. We get out there, and I told him before we left the clubhouse, or when we got out there and we parked our pickups, I got out and I said, and old Mr. Harlow, he takes that dog everywhere, and of course D Patton, he takes those dogs everywhere too. The LBK, them guys got plenty of dog power as well.
They do a
I
lot of
said,
winning.
well, I said, if I'm going to draw some dogs, I'm going to draw the best and just beat them at the beginning. I don't want to have to fool with you in the second round when my dog might be tired. I said, I'm just going to knock you out first. And, we all chuckled and kind of went on, and we get out and we're on this open pasture, and I have been working on cutting from a pasture. I said, if I watched enough hunts on YouTube and stuff where them guys will do that open pasture cutting, or open field, whatever, cornfield, and cut them dogs from a plowed up field, and them dogs will get treed, So I've been working on it, working on it like crazy. So I get in there and we cut him loose. Old Spike goes, and I think he went out about 400, if I remember right, is what D said. That hound, he went straight north. That hound went to the right and went, I don't know, probably 2 something or 3 something. And Jet went completely left hand and then turned and went south. He goes in there in about a minute and whatever, he falls treed. Had a young man named Jeremiah that was with us that's been walking some of these casts with us, and he's just kind of learning and all that and wanting to see how it goes. And he was there, and then Brandon Fowler was our judge. He goes in there in a minute and however many seconds, and he falls treed. And then these guys, anybody that's seen the little Oklahoma hunting pages, always joke about how those fox squirrels will sit there and bark back at my dog. I said, I guess they don't feel threatened by them little dogs. He goes in there, and we can hear the squirrel barking at him. I mean, Jet, he falls treed. I call him treed within a minute something. I get in there and I'm feeling good, and I'll get in there and I'm shaking my arms off, and just couldn't get that squirrel. He must have hit back in a hole and couldn't get him out, and go through that cast, and he's in there competing, he falls treat again. And then those experienced dogs, they just kind of showed where they were the real deal. That hound would fall treed, old Spike would fall treed, and Jet would be off by himself, and he would fall treed, and then he would quit on it. And I could tell he was, you know, over there trying to work it and maybe work out one of them grays, and he hadn't been on any since last spring. So I figured I was going to be in the rough start, this first hunt. And it showed a little bit, I think he made a 200 circle or something like that. Didn't do bad, just couldn't pick his squirrel out. He stayed apart, and did his thing and competed, and I think, and Spike ended up winning it in the last. He was actually down, and Spike came, and I think there was 8 minutes left or something, and he goes like 30 yards from us. The hound, we had all been leash locked, and the hound went. Harlow's dog was winning, with circle points, and we couldn't shake a squirrel out to save our life. And he goes in there, and it was 400 circle, 300 circle, 200 circle, I believe, in there. And and Jet did take a minus, so he did timber a gray in there, I believe. So he did take a minus in there. So I did have a minus. So I was kind of out of the race right there. Anyways, I just needed meat just to get out of the hole. And then old Spike goes in there like 30 yards, man, and on a dang sapling that's got a nest at the top of it. I'm telling you, I could probably jump up and hit this nest. D shakes at one time, and there hops out the gray squirrel, and he shows why he's the man, and he pulls it off, and we kind of just chuckle and go from there. And that hound was back in there deep, and we ran out of time, and that's how that one was won, and two things that came out of it, that made me feel like I was doing something right, just from learning. I've been on 5 casts, or something like that. I can't really count offhand, 5 or 6 casts. And Mr. Harlow, he said, I'm going to give you credit, bud. He goes, that hound has never been in a cast where she doesn't tree the first squirrel. And so, I mean, I said, well, I can take that as a win, and then D comes up to me, he goes, Chris, he goes, you worked hard on that little dog. These guys that I call professionals, is what I would consider professionals. And D goes, man, he goes, that's night and day from that state in January. He's like, he said, I'm proud of you, man. It looks pretty good. I took it as a win, to go against these dogs that get packed around, and I just try to hit up the Oklahoma ones, just still learning. So we went out and competed a little bit. We had one slip up there on a squirrel, and what it was that him and Spike were probably, I don't know, a good 100 yards away, maybe not even 100, maybe been about 80 or so. Jet just went, and I think the squirrel either was between them or something, and just got a bad break, and he took off after it, and as we were coming in, and that's what got us there. And but other than that, it was a pretty good cash, and that's the last one I've been on. So I've learned quite a bit. The stopwatch, I recommend a stopwatch. I understood having a stopwatch, but after the first couple of casts, I know when he's got the meat and he feels he's got the meat, he's not going to leave, for the most part, unless that sucker starts to timber, so a good lead and a stopwatch is the best friend for a comp hunter, and I've learned that, so.
What about the rules? When you first started, did you really feel like you had a good handle? Because I think the NSD rules, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say it's like 26 or 28 pages of rules.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah, no, I did not have a good handle on the rules at all.
do you feel like that affected you quite a bit?
It did. Yeah, it did affect me quite a bit. And luckily I've been, all I know to do is, and all I know to do is call my dog treed when my dog trees, and I'm not gonna lie. Didn't like studying when I was in college, uh, still the same way at 37. I'll tell you the truth. And I go to play, and I'll pick them up every now and then and read a little bit of the rules, but some of it, I learn in the field, watching. I've had quite a few guys be good mentors for me when the way they break it down. Just getting away from the actual verbiage of it wrote down to putting it in dummy terms for this new guy. They've helped quite a bit out there in the field. Whether it's one of the judges, I'll ask a question, and they'll help me answer it. And I've actually had other guys help me out there in the field. Ricky, D, Reggie, Mark. I mean, all those guys were coon hunters and stuff too, so they know fairly well how it goes. I didn't grow up around tree dogs at all. Had uncles that had a few bird dogs, and that's what we would do. And the other uncles that had coon hounds, they were so old they had got out of it. So I just never even grew up around nothing like the comp side. So that's been a lot of the struggles for me, really needing to know those rules, and not understanding that the handler is a big part
It's a
it.
team for sure.
It's unreal. It's a team sport. It really is. It's like playing tennis doubles. You can't just have Michael Jordan out there thinking he's gonna cover that whole court. Or I guess I used two sports there, but it's arena. I guess I should say. But it really is. You got to have a good feel for your dog, and you got to know when to call it. And it's interesting, man. I enjoy the heck out of it. I wish I could travel more. 4 kids and they all play ball, so from college down to 5th grade, so it's tough. Otherwise I'd be on the road every weekend to go somewhere, whether it's a Fiest hunt or NSD. I'd go give it a whirl just to learn more.
Yeah, Ricky Merrill, I drew him a few times. I just kept drawing them when the OK Oklahoma NSD chapter started up. Was kind of getting back into comp hunts, which I hadn't done a whole lot of it, but I drew him a few times, and he was a really big help for me too. Just as far as telling you how you should be handling your dog, actually trying to help you out and try to teach you something. He was really good about helping me out with that.
It's unreal, man, how you can get out there in the field and you meet those guys, and and long as you're good with them, they're good with you, and you can get a lot of knowledge from them.
Hmm.
It's pretty cool how that works, man. It's competitive. It ain't like being on the basketball court or on the mound. There if there's somebody out there on a cast that's that serious, at a regular just weekend hunt, and $100 on the line or $80 or something, and they're that ate up with it, I probably don't want to be on the cast with them, to be honest. And then don't get me wrong, there's some guys that are just that competitive, but I've been lucky enough that I've got on cast that most of those guys are open to me and they give me advice. And maybe it's because they don't feel threatened by my little 22-pound dog, that might be why they give me advice as well.
I feel like most of the guys are pretty good natured as a
Yeah, they
whole.
are. They are.
Especially if you're that way back to them, usually things get along pretty good from my experience.
Right. And it's to be honest, a lot of that comp stuff, man, and don't get me wrong, I like to win. Like I said, all my kids play ball. I'm competitive. I coach a lot of ball. I'm truly I like to win. But a lot of it is I don't get to experience other dogs because no one real I have to travel 2 hours to get into other dogs, to get
Hmm.
to meet up with someone just to hunt. So I can say, and I could be wrong, there might be somebody I don't know, but I like to say I'm the best dog hunter, squirrel hunter in Western Oklahoma.
You're the only
There
one I
might only
know
be
of.
two or three, over here. So I got to at least Northwest, I like to say that. So whether I'm the only one or not, but no, it's just, and that's part of the reason why I want to do the comp, just so I can see. And I always know there's gonna be better dogs out there, but I really want to see, other dogs work. I think it's neat to go to a cast that I had a couple weekends ago, and it was a hound, a Fiest, and a cur. I said, it don't get any better than that. I said, I want to see how this plays out. And it's just neat to see that and see how they work. And like I said, didn't without growing up on it, I've done a little bit of coon hunting, but I'm sitting here thinking, how do them dogs react? Is that dog gonna open up quite a bit? Or that she would just fall treed. She was kind of like a cur and just fall treed. So it was pretty neat to kind of see how that played out. It was similar. And just had a big old mouth. She had an 80-pound mouth, and my dog had a 22-pound mouth, and there was times where I kind of back off the tree when he was checking just so I could hear my little dog tree, 100 and 200 yards away. And I understand why you might want more mouth, out there, so you can hear it. So I mean, there's a lot of things that went through my head that I'm contemplating on with the next dog. Do I go a different route or something?
Yeah, how far can you hear Jed on an average day? I'm not talking about like super windy or nothing, but on average, how far do you think you can usually hear him?
Say that he's got a decent mouth. I've heard him at five.
Yep.
I've heard him at 500. But most of his trees where I hunt are 300 and less, and most of the time in places I've hunt, it's 150 and he's fallen treed, so it's not like you got to have this big old giant mouth
Does
over
he
here.
does he check in
Those
a lot as he
windy
hunts?
days, it can kind of get, he gets over 300, 350, if he gets over that on windy days, on them hard days, it gets a little tough, but most of the time and I try to blame some of it on, because I mean that weekend they told me that he actually had Brandon said he had a pretty decent mouth. I was like, yeah, I think so, but I also work in a factory, most of my life, and it's loud, so I think he's got a decent mouth. And then I hear that big old hound and that cur dog, and I'm going, ooh, I don't know if he's got enough mouth, to compete, but he does pretty good. But most of the time, like I said, that 200 range is all I need a hearing from, and it's plenty, around here. But yeah, it is fun, I really enjoy him. I wish I look back now and wish I'd have pulled that lead out a little sooner. I mean, he does pretty good, and a stopwatch. And I don't know which one I should have done more of. He does, just like I talked about my minus in there, and some of the bad parts of it is, I've talked about a couple casts having minuses. Just these fox squirrels just don't timber. It's late in the year is when they timber, and late in the year is usually, I'm knocking them down, or the kids or some buddies are knocking them down. So I don't think nothing about it. We get in there and they start hopping tree to tree, and we probably already got him knocked down, and I send him on again, So I've learned quite a bit this last season for the most part. When I knock any out to him, I started tying him, talking to guys again, how do I go with my dog that I feel is comp ready? He's by far the best one I have, and that's what they said. They said even if you're knocking them down, you just go time, and I started doing that quite a bit more, tying him, and plus a lot of it I just been working on a stopwatch. I knocked some out the other weekend, because we had worked pretty hard through the heat to get ready for that first hunt in September, and I went and knocked a mess out. Ant was wanting some fresh ones, so I went and knocked 6 out to him, and there might have been 2 trees in there that I didn't time, that sucker was already trying to go one more tree, and I hunt with a 22, so I went ahead and popped him. But other than that, I had him tied at every tree, and I worked the stopwatch on all those squirrels, though. That is one thing I started doing. And I can tell, most of us can tell when they got the meat and when it's a den, and I could tell. And I've been working him, even meat hunting, I've been working him with the stopwatch, So the main 2 things that I could say is a stopwatch and that lead, though, bud. I can't stress that enough. And then reading up on those rules if you want to get over transitioning to that comp hunting.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I had a litter here, and going to start working on the next one and see what comes of it. I had a litter a couple pups out of my little female Pretty and Jet, and that's what I'm going to work towards is, strictly trying to make it a comp style dog, so and doing that, and got another pup coming from Dexter. You're gonna get a kick out of that, Kobe.
Well, what's this one gonna be?
It ain't gonna be a little dog, that. Dexter don't hunt anything little,
I don't
So
guess
I'm
I know
gonna
Dexter.
Dexter Alexander.
Oh,
So
yeah, okay, yeah. I've met him. Yep.
Yeah, I think you met him probably at a OMCBA hunt, right? I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah. We hunted. We were in the final cast at the OMCBA Oklahoma State hunt.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, he seemed like a real nice guy. Nice meeting you.
Yeah. I had talked to him around May when I started thinking about my next move, and he was about to breed and I was about to breed my dogs, and he had reached out to me, and we started talking, and I had talked to him when he had his trying to think of that other dog that you hunted against.
Medina, I
her
think
name
was
was
her name.
Medina. Is that what her
I
name
think
was?
so. I think it was
Maybe.
Bad Medina.
Yeah. So I was trying to get a pup out of that, like 2 years ago or something. And I think this female that he bred is out of that, and she's a pretty nice dog. And we had talked, and he said, "You're going to be on my list the next time," So my Fiest pups and that pup, I think they're 7, and my Fiest pups are 8, and those pups are 7 weeks old. So we got to meet up and get that pup. So I'm going to have a interesting winter, trying to see the differences and train it again. I hadn't had a pup in 3 years, so it'll be interesting to see if I learned anything and go from there and start working towards some new style comp dogs. So,
Well, I surely hope the best of luck to you on that deal. Looking forward to seeing what you can make them into.
yes, sir. I appreciate it, man.
I think we're about running out of time for today. But, man, I really want to say thanks to you. I've sure enjoyed visiting with you and listening to your stories.
Right. I appreciate you having me and wanting to show interest in my transition, man. I sure appreciate it. I love these little squirrel dogs and wish I'd have done it 20 years ago, and longer than 8, but I've learned a lot, met a lot of nice people, and it's a great deal. But just that little Pretty dog, I actually sold her this morning. Little boy came out and he hopped out of that truck, man, and he was fired up. I think he's 5 is what he was, and Pretty came out that box, and they were like, "Oh, she really is little." I said, "Yeah, she's a little dog. I told you guys, she's a little fireball. And that kid got to loving on her, and she's all about it. And I said, I hope you enjoy her. I said, me and my kids really enjoyed it, and just to see that little kid glow right there, I don't care if I win another comp hunt or not, that was kind of a blessing today to see that first thing this morning and give that pup to that kid, and they get to enjoy her now. So get another one, get another kid started, so I was pretty pumped up about that. So,
Well, I'm sure they'll enjoy her.
yes, sir. I appreciate it, bud.
All right, everybody. Take care and keep wearing out that boot leather. I just want to give everyone that's listening a sincere thank you. Getting this podcast going has been a project. I really hope you're enjoying it, and if you don't mind, give the show a good rating and review wherever you're listening to it at, or share it on your social media to help get some traction. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to your feedback.